The phone rang at 2:37 a.m., the shrill sound piercing through the silence of the dark room. Eric was startled awake, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone before his mind had fully caught up. The screen flashed with his sister's name, Katie. It was strange. He hadn't heard from her in weeks. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog of sleep, and answered, his voice hoarse. "Katie?" It took a moment for her to speak. The silence stretched, and the calmness in the air made him uneasy. Something was wrong. He could feel it. "Eric," her voice cracked. It was faint, barely above a whisper, but the terror in it was unmistakable. It's about the accident. They're gone." He blinked, unsure if he'd heard her correctly. His heart started to race. His mind couldn't process her words. "What do you mean? Who's gone?" His sister let out a sob, and it felt like the air left his lungs. He heard her breathe in shakily before the next words hit him harder than anything. "Mom and Dad, they were in a car crash. A truck, they didn't survive. Eric, they're gone." The world tilted beneath him. The floor beneath his feet felt unsteady as he stood there, gripping the edge of his nightstand. His throat went dry. No, he couldn't even form a full sentence. The very idea of losing his parents, it was too much to grasp. Katie's voice was barely audible through her tears. "I don't know what to do. I'm not sure how to handle this, Eric. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do." For a moment, Eric just stood there, letting the gravity of the news sink in. His parents were gone. His mind kept trying to convince him it wasn't true, but the truth had already taken root. And with it, an overwhelming feeling of helplessness. There was a pause. Katie's breathing came in shallow gasps, and Eric felt a pang of guilt. His thoughts immediately jumped to his niece, Emma. She was only 12. She'd lost her parents, the only people who had been there for her. He couldn't even imagine what she was going through right now. His heart clenched at the thought of her facing this alone. "Katie, what about Emma?" His voice trembled as he asked, but it was more out of concern than fear. "Where is she? How is she?" Katie's silence seemed to stretch forever. When she finally spoke, her voice was full of fear. She's here. She doesn't understand yet. She's in the room, just sitting there. She's not crying, Eric. I don't know what to do." The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. Emma, his young niece, was sitting there, alone, trying to make sense of the devastation. He wasn't prepared for this. He was the one who had always been distant, the one who was too consumed with his career to keep up with family matters. He wasn't ready for the responsibility, but now it was his, whether he was prepared or not. He had to act. "I'm coming," he said, his voice firm despite the panic running through him. "I'll be there as soon as I can." He didn't wait for a response, just ended the call. His mind raced as he threw on a jacket and grabbed his keys. The drive seemed endless, each mile stretching out before him, a void he wasn't sure how to fill. Emma's face kept appearing in his mind, the image of her small frame, her innocent eyes, her confusion. She had no idea how much her world was about to change. Eric knew he had to be there for her, but he had no idea what he was supposed to do. The road blurred as he drove, the familiar scenery passing by in a haze. His thoughts kept returning to his niece. He hadn't seen her in months. She was just a child. How could he be the one to take care of her now? He wasn't a father. He was a businessman. A CEO. His world had always been filled with meetings, deals, deadlines. He'd never dealt with grief on this scale before. But he knew one thing, he had to be there for Emma. She couldn't be left to face this alone. His phone buzzed in his hand, but he ignored it. His focus was on the road, his mind trying to piece together how he would navigate this new chapter. What was he supposed to do? He couldn't even comfort his own sister. How was he supposed to comfort a traumatized child? By the time Eric reached his sister's house, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting a dim glow over the quiet neighborhood. He parked the car, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his stomach churned with anxiety. Katie was standing at the door when he arrived, her face pale, tear-streaked. She didn't even need to say anything. Her eyes told him everything. She was barely holding herself together. But what hurt the most was the empty look in her eyes, the same emptiness he feared Emma would carry for the rest of her life. Without a word, Katie stepped aside, letting him into the house. The air inside was heavy with grief, thick with the pain of loss. Emma was sitting in the living room. She hadn't moved since he had left the hospital to drive here. The girl was curled up on the couch, her legs drawn to her chest, her face buried in her knees. She looked so small, so fragile. And yet, there was something about her that made Eric hesitate. He didn't know how to approach her. How could he? Emma? His voice was soft, but it seemed to echo in the quiet room. She didn't move. He took a few steps closer, but the space between them felt like an abyss. It was Katie who spoke next, her voice breaking. She hasn't said a word since the accident. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help her. Eric felt an unfamiliar panic rising inside him. His hands shook as he knelt down beside the couch. Emma, it's Uncle Eric, he said gently. I'm here. You're not alone. There was a long silence, the only sound was the soft rustle of the blanket Emma was clutching. He waited. He wasn't sure what else to say. How could words ever fill the chasm of grief she was experiencing? How could he make her feel safe when the world around her had shattered? Finally, Emma shifted, her head tilting slightly. She didn't look at him, but he could feel her awareness. She knew he was there. She was just lost. She didn't know where to go, what to do. Her world had just crumbled. Eric had no answers. He wasn't a father. He wasn't even a good uncle. But in that moment, he realized something he hadn't truly understood before: it didn't matter if he had all the answers. What mattered was that he was here. What mattered was that he wasn't going to leave her alone. I'll stay with you, Eric said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together. Emma didn't respond, but he could feel a small shift in the air. Maybe she didn't believe him yet, maybe she wasn't ready to trust that this was real. But Eric meant every word. He would stay. No matter how hard it got, no matter how many sleepless nights, he would stay. Katie walked over and sat beside him, her voice breaking through the silence. I don't know how to do this, Eric. I don't know what's next. I don't know how to raise her. Eric glanced at his sister, her face etched with sorrow. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out. The house was silent when Eric woke up the next morning. The kind of silence that felt heavy, almost suffocating. It was still dark outside, and he had only managed a few hours of restless sleep. His mind had raced the entire night, filled with thoughts of his niece, Emma, and the daunting task ahead of him. He stood up from the couch, stretching his stiff limbs. His body ached, but it was a dull ache compared to the tension in his chest. He didn't know how to approach this. The reality of what had happened, what was happening, was starting to settle in. His parents were gone. Katie was barely holding it together. And Emma. Emma had lost everything. The idea of what that might mean for her future weighed heavily on him. As he walked into the kitchen, he could hear faint noises coming from the living room. The sound of soft shuffling. His heart tightened. Emma. She was awake, and though the house was quiet, there was something about the stillness that felt unnerving. She was either lost in her own world or trying to avoid it entirely. Eric didn't know how long he stood there, staring at the coffee pot, willing himself to move. He needed to get this right. He couldn't afford to fail her. Not now. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Focus. One step at a time. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug grounding him. The sound of the coffee brewing was strangely comforting, something familiar in a house that no longer felt like his own. He glanced over at the clock. It was still early, too early for Katie to be awake. But Emma, she would be up. She didn't need sleep, not really. Not when her world had shattered. Taking another breath, Eric made his way to the living room. As he stepped inside, he saw Emma sitting by the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes staring out into the distance. She didn't even acknowledge him, just sat there, still as stone. The same posture she had held the night before. It was as if she had become part of the furniture, frozen in time. He cleared his throat, but even the simple sound felt too loud in the quiet room. "Emma," he called softly. There was no response. He moved closer, and then, after a moment, he crouched down in front of her, gently reaching for her hand. Her eyes flickered to his for just a second, then immediately dropped back to the floor. She didn't pull away, but she didn't move either. It was as if she was there, but not really there. Eric felt his heart ache. She had retreated so far inside herself, there was almost no way to reach her. He sat down beside her, trying to keep his voice steady. "I know you're hurting, Emma," he began. "But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." She didn't respond. The silence that hung between them was deafening. But Eric refused to give up. He wasn't going to give her space, not right now. Not when she was in this kind of pain. He would be patient. "We have to stick together," he continued. "You and me, we're family. And family looks out for each other, no matter what." Still, nothing. Eric could feel the walls she had built around herself, thick and impenetrable. She had shut him out, and he wasn't sure how to break through. He couldn't expect her to just magically open up to him. He had to earn her trust, somehow. But how? "I know it's hard. But I need you to try," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "I can't do this alone. We need each other." It was like a switch had been flipped. Her shoulders trembled slightly, but it was all she allowed herself to do. For a long moment, Eric just sat there, watching her, waiting for her to react, to give him something. Anything. He wasn't sure what he expected, but the hope in his chest flickered like a dying flame. Then, very softly, Emma spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you here?" Eric blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected a question, at least not one like that. It wasn't the kind of question you prepared for. It wasn't, "Why did this happen?" or "Where's Mom and Dad?" It was a question about him. Why was he here? He wasn't sure how to answer. He wasn't sure what would even make sense to her. Because you're my family," he said simply. "I'm your family. And when something like this happens, we help each other." Emma didn't respond. But for the first time since the accident, she seemed to listen. She didn't look at him, but the way her body held still, as if she was actually processing what he had said, gave him a glimmer of hope. She might not be ready to let him in, but maybe she would one day. Eric stayed with her for a while, not speaking, just sitting in the quiet. He didn't have the answers she needed, but he could be there. That was the one thing he knew he could do right now. Later that morning, Katie finally emerged from her room, looking as exhausted as Eric felt. She hadn't slept much, he could tell. The deep lines on her face, the red eyes, the way she moved so slowly, it was clear she was grieving, but more than that, she was overwhelmed. She wasn't just mourning the loss of their parents, she was trying to keep her own life together while also trying to help her daughter navigate this unimaginable pain. Eric had made breakfast, though he wasn't sure if anyone was in the mood to eat. He placed 2 plates of eggs and toast on the table, and when Katie finally sat down, he offered her a tired smile. "We need to talk," he said. Katie nodded, her eyes flickering to Emma's empty spot at the table. "Yeah," Katie replied, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to do anymore." She's barely spoken. "I don't know if I can help her, Eric. I'm not strong enough for this. I'm not strong enough for her." Eric reached across the table, putting a hand on hers. "You don't have to do this alone. We're in this together, Katie. I know I'm not the most prepared for this, but I can't let her go through this alone." Katie looked at him with a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. I know. It's just hard. I can't even imagine what Emma's feeling right now." "Neither can I," Eric admitted. "But I think it's just going to take time. She needs us both. We need to show her that we're here." Katie took a shaky breath. "I don't even know where to start, Eric. I don't know how to help her process all of this." Eric's mind raced as he thought about his own feelings of helplessness. He hadn't dealt with grief like this before. He had been so focused on his career, on success, on climbing higher and higher that he never once stopped to think about what truly mattered: family. His parents were gone, and with them, so much of what he had taken for granted. But Emma, she still had the chance to heal. They all did. They just had to find a way to help her through this. "I think we need to let her take the lead," Eric said, feeling more confident in his words now. "She has to process it at her own pace. We can't rush her. But we can be here for her. And we need to give her space to grieve." Katie nodded slowly, her eyes moist with the weight of her own pain. "I hope she doesn't shut us out. I hope she lets us in." "I think she will," Eric said. "Eventually." The days after the funeral felt like a blur. The world seemed to have gone on without hesitation, but inside Eric's house, everything was different. The house, once filled with the noise of his parents' laughter, the warmth of family dinners, and the usual chaos of daily life, was now eerily quiet. It was as if time had frozen, and the world outside had moved forward while they were trapped in this strange, painful limbo. Emma hadn't spoken much since that morning, the day Eric had sat with her by the window. She had barely touched her food and spent most of her time in her room, staring at nothing. He hadn't expected things to get better overnight, but the stillness of the house, of her, was starting to wear on him. Eric had tried everything. He'd offered to take Emma out for ice cream, hoping it would bring a smile to her face, even just for a moment. He'd asked her if she wanted to watch a movie or play a game, anything to get her to interact with him. But each time, Emma had simply shaken her head, retreating further into her shell. Katie, on the other hand, had thrown herself into the funeral arrangements, the paperwork, and the practical side of things. She hadn't had the luxury of sitting still, not like Eric. But even in her busyness, Eric could see how fragile she was, how much the weight of everything was breaking her down. She wasn't just mourning her parents, she was terrified of losing her daughter. Katie's fear was palpable, and Eric could feel it every time she looked at Emma with helpless eyes. One morning, after a week of silence from Emma, Katie broke down at the breakfast table. She hadn't cried much before, not openly, but now the tears flowed freely, blurring her vision. She pushed her plate away, her hands shaking. "I can't do this," she said, her voice cracking. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I don't know how to fix this." Eric immediately stood up, moving to her side. He sat down beside her, putting a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Katie, you're not alone. We're in this together." Katie wiped her tears, her face pale with exhaustion. "I keep thinking if I just try harder, maybe she'll talk to me. Maybe she'll let me in, but it's like I'm invisible. I don't even know who she is anymore. I'm afraid she's slipping away from me." Eric's heart ached for her. He understood the fear all too well. He had seen how grief could consume a person, could steal them away in ways that felt impossible to fight. He'd been fighting his own battle with it, and he knew how helpless it could make you feel. "We'll figure this out," Eric said quietly, his voice steady. "We just need time. And we need to give Emma space. It's not about fixing her right now. It's about being here, no matter what." Katie nodded, but the doubt still lingered in her eyes. She wasn't convinced. But Eric wasn't sure what else to say. He could tell her that everything would be okay, that Emma would eventually open up, but he didn't know that for sure. All he knew was that they couldn't give up on her. Not now. Later that day, Eric was in the living room, sorting through papers, when he heard the sound of footsteps. Soft and slow, almost hesitant. He looked up, and there stood Emma, standing in the doorway, her eyes on the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she was holding herself together. "Emma?" Eric said, his voice cautious. "Are you okay?" Emma didn't answer. She just stood there, her eyes cast downward, staring at the floor as if there was something there worth looking at. Eric wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was just empty. After a long moment, she took a small step forward, then another. Eric waited, holding his breath. Was she about to speak? Was she about to finally say something? He couldn't let himself get too hopeful, but he couldn't help it. Every inch of progress felt monumental. He had to take it one step at a time. She finally lifted her head and met his gaze, her eyes dull but not unfocused. "I don't want to go back to school," she said flatly, her voice quiet but steady. Eric was taken aback. That was the first time she had spoken directly to him in days. And the first real conversation since the accident. But what she said left him uncertain. He wasn't sure if she was asking him for permission or if it was a statement of what she needed. "You don't have to go back right away," Eric said softly. "But we can't let you drop everything, Emma. You need to keep moving forward. It's part of the healing process." Emma shook her head slowly. "How can I move forward when everything's changed? How do I even start?" Eric's heart sank as he realized the weight of her words. She wasn't just grieving the loss of her parents. She was grieving the loss of her entire life. Everything she had known, the people she had trusted, the stability she had relied on, had been ripped away in an instant. "I don't have the answers, Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this. But I do know this, you don't have to go through it alone." For the first time in days, Emma looked directly at him. Her gaze was tired, filled with sadness, but there was something else in her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability. She didn't say anything more, but she didn't turn away either. Eric wanted to reach out, to pull her into a hug, to let her know that he was there for her. But he knew better than to force it. He needed to let her take this moment at her own pace. He could be there, but he couldn't push her. Not yet. Emma took a deep breath and glanced toward the door, as if contemplating leaving. "I'm going to go outside," she said quietly. And before Eric could respond, she walked out the door, stepping into the backyard. Eric watched her go, his heart heavy with a mix of hope and uncertainty. That night, Eric was standing in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, when he saw Emma again. She was sitting by the back window, her face turned toward the darkened sky. He knew she wasn't asleep. She hadn't been for a while. But something was different tonight. There was a stillness about her, an acceptance, as if she had made peace with her pain, even if only for a moment. Eric didn't want to intrude. He had been giving her space, respecting her need for solitude. But he also knew he couldn't just let her stay isolated forever. He took a step closer, his voice gentle. "Emma?" She didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice almost lost in the quiet. Eric felt his heart squeeze in his chest. She didn't owe him an apology. "You don't have to be sorry," he said, kneeling beside her. "You don't need to apologize for feeling what you're feeling." Emma sniffled, her shoulders shaking slightly. She wiped her eyes quickly, but the tears were already there. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to go on without them." Eric's chest tightened. He knew exactly how she felt. In that moment, he realized that they were both struggling in their own ways, both lost in the wake of the same tragedy. "We're going to figure this out together," he said softly. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be here for you. Always." Emma didn't respond. She just sat there, staring out into the night. But for the first time, Eric felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. A crack had appeared, and through it, there was the faintest glimmer of light. It would take time, but they would heal. Together. Eric stood by the window, staring at the view, but his mind was far from the morning sunshine glistening on the trees outside. The phone call from the lawyer had left him unsettled. He had tried to shake it off, focusing on his work, but the words kept echoing in his mind, "There's something important we need to address." The inheritance? The guardianship? What could be so urgent? His hands felt clammy, and his pulse quickened as he thought of Emma. He hadn't expected to face anything more complicated than the grief that had already consumed their lives. But now, a new layer had been added, one he wasn't prepared for. Katie had taken Emma to a therapy appointment that morning, leaving Eric alone with his thoughts. He couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the accident than he had initially thought. What if the lawyer's call had something to do with the estate? What if Emma's parents had left behind secrets that could change everything? As Eric paced across the room, he realized just how little he knew about his sister-in-law's family. He'd been so focused on Emma's immediate needs and the overwhelming grief that had come with the tragedy, he hadn't asked questions. There had been no time to dig into the past. It was all about survival, keeping their heads above water. But now, the mystery loomed over him. That afternoon, Eric arrived at the lawyer's office, trying to keep his emotions in check. The building was sleek, modern, and intimidating. He had always felt out of place in places like this. The polished floors and glass walls seemed to mock him. He wasn't some high-powered executive, he was just a man who had been thrust into a situation that didn't make sense. Inside, the receptionist led him down a long hallway into a spacious, minimalist office. A man in his 50s, wearing a sharp suit, stood to greet him. His name was Robert Sinclair, and his sharp features and icy demeanor immediately put Eric on edge. "Mr. Turner, thank you for coming," Sinclair said, motioning for Eric to sit. "I understand this has been a difficult time for you and your niece. Please, let's get right to it." Eric nodded, though the tightness in his chest made it hard to breathe. "I'm here to understand what's going on. You said there's something important regarding the guardianship. What's this all about?" Sinclair sat down, his gaze focused. "It's about your niece's inheritance. You see, her parents weren't just ordinary people. They were involved in certain business ventures that, frankly, are more complicated than we initially realized." Eric's brow furrowed. "What kind of business ventures? I thought they were just a quiet couple. They didn't mention anything to me about their wealth or business dealings." "That's part of the issue," Sinclair continued, his voice low and serious. "Your niece's parents left behind a significant fortune, but it's not straightforward. There are assets tied up in offshore accounts, private investments, and a series of legal entanglements that I'm still untangling. And there's one thing you need to know, Emma is not just inheriting her parents' estate." Eric's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Emma is the heir to something much larger. A legacy that could change the direction of your family's future. But we'll need to tread carefully. There are others who are aware of Emma's position, and not all of them have her best interests at heart. Eric was silent, trying to process the flood of information. He had no idea that his niece's parents had been involved in anything so complex, let alone that Emma had inherited something so valuable. He didn't know what to say. "I need more information," Eric said, his voice tight. "What kind of legacy? What's going on? Why didn't anyone tell me about this?" Sinclair's expression darkened. "It's not something you're meant to know right now. But I can tell you this, your niece's life is in danger. There are people who would do anything to gain control of her inheritance. You need to protect her." Eric's heart pounded. What kind of people? What exactly are we dealing with here? Sinclair paused, clearly weighing his words. "That's something I can't explain fully just yet. But trust me when I say that you've been thrust into something far bigger than you realize." Later that day, Eric returned home, his mind reeling with the information he had just learned. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear: the life he had been trying to rebuild was now at risk. He had promised to protect Emma, but how could he do that when he had no idea who or what he was up against? When Katie and Emma returned home, Eric was sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, deep in thought. He looked up when they entered the room, his expression unreadable. Emma seemed quieter than usual, her face pale, as though she had spent the whole session in silence, just like she had in the days before. Katie immediately noticed something was off. "Eric? What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." Eric didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath and turned to face her. "Katie, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you sooner." Katie's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" Eric hesitated, his mind racing. "Emma's parents, your sister and her husband, they weren't just wealthy. They were involved in some business dealings, things I never knew about. And Emma, she's inherited more than just their estate. She's inherited something far bigger. Something dangerous." Katie's face paled, her expression a mixture of confusion and fear. "What are you talking about? What could be so dangerous?" Eric stood up, pacing the room. "I don't have all the details yet, but I just spoke with their lawyer. He told me that Emma's inheritance isn't just money. It's a legacy, a business empire that's tangled in all sorts of legal complications. And there are people out there who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it." Katie shook her head, clearly struggling to comprehend. "But how do we protect her from that? She's just a kid. She shouldn't have to deal with any of this." "I don't know," Eric said, his voice strained. "But we need to act quickly. I don't know who's after her or why, but I'm not taking any chances. We'll keep her safe. We have to." Emma, who had been standing quietly by the door, spoke up, her voice soft but filled with a strange determination. "I don't want to be a part of this anymore." Eric turned to look at her, his heart aching. "What do you mean, Emma? You don't have a choice. You're part of this, whether you like it or not." Emma shook her head again, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never asked for any of this. I didn't ask for my parents to die. I didn't ask for their money, their business, or any of the secrets they kept from me. I just want to be normal." Eric felt a pang of guilt. He knew she was right. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was just a girl who had lost everything. And now, she was being dragged into a world of danger and deceit she didn't understand. "I know, Emma," Eric said quietly, kneeling in front of her. "I know. But I promise you, we'll figure this out. We'll protect you. No one will hurt you." Emma didn't respond. She just looked away, her eyes filled with a mix of confusion and anger. That night, Eric sat in the living room, his head in his hands. He had promised Emma he would protect her, but how could he keep that promise when he didn't even understand what he was up against? The weight of everything felt crushing. The legal complications, the hidden dangers, the secrets. It was all so much. As he sat there, trying to piece everything together, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from Sinclair. "There's more you need to know. Meet me tomorrow. Bring Emma. I can't explain it all over the phone, but this is bigger than I let on. Time is running out." Eric's blood ran cold. What could possibly be bigger than what he had already heard? What was he walking into? Eric sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, as the weight of the situation continued to press down on him. The text from Sinclair still lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Time is running out. Those words had unsettled him more than anything. What did Sinclair mean? What was coming that was so urgent? He glanced at Emma in the passenger seat. She was silent, her gaze fixed out the window, as though she were lost in her own thoughts. The therapy session had done little to ease the pain she carried. Eric hated seeing her like this, distant and guarded, but he understood. She was a young girl who had already been through so much. How could anyone expect her to process all that had happened? Eric took a deep breath and tried to focus. Today was supposed to bring answers. But the more he thought about it, the less he understood. What had Emma's parents gotten involved in? And why hadn't anyone mentioned it before? Katie had stayed behind to work, which was probably for the best. She had enough on her plate, and this was something Eric needed to handle on his own. The lawyer's cryptic messages had only raised more questions, and now he was heading into the unknown, trying to figure out how to keep his niece safe. They arrived at the lawyer's office just as the morning lights started to fade. The building loomed in front of them, cold and imposing. Eric's stomach churned as he opened the door and led Emma inside. She didn't say a word, her eyes tired and hollow. He could see how much she was struggling. The weight of everything, her loss, the new reality, the uncertainty, was slowly crushing her. Inside the office, Robert Sinclair was waiting. The lawyer's usual cold demeanor was gone, replaced with an almost frantic urgency. He rose from behind his desk as Eric and Emma entered, motioning for them to sit. "Thank you for coming," Sinclair said, his voice low, almost hurried. "We don't have much time. This is far bigger than I ever imagined." Eric frowned. "You've been saying that for days. What exactly is going on? What aren't you telling us?" Sinclair glanced at Emma before speaking. "I'm sorry for what you're both going through. This situation. It's not easy. Your niece's parents were involved in something very dangerous. And Emma," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "She's been caught in the middle of a power struggle. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to gain control of what they left behind." Eric's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, control? What's so important that it's worth all this trouble?" Sinclair's gaze darkened. "It's not just money. It's power. Your niece's parents were part of a shadow organization. They were involved in covert operations, high-level investments, and, most importantly, they had access to confidential information that could change the balance of power in several industries. And now, that information has been passed on to Emma." Eric's mind raced. "What kind of operations? And why didn't you tell me any of this before?" "Because I didn't know the full extent of it," Sinclair replied, his voice grim. "I was only given part of the details after their deaths. And I'm still uncovering the truth. But what I do know is that Emma's parents weren't just ordinary people. They were deeply embedded in a network that spans far beyond anything you could imagine. And Emma, by virtue of her inheritance, has become a target." Eric looked at Emma, who was still staring out the window, her face pale and unreadable. He reached over and touched her shoulder gently. "Emma, we're in this together. You don't have to be afraid. We'll figure it out. We'll protect you." She didn't respond. Her silence was deafening. Eric wished he could reach her, wished he could take away the terror that seemed to consume her. But the truth was, he was terrified too. Sinclair leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's more, Eric. The people who are after Emma's inheritance, they're not just criminals. They're powerful, and they have connections everywhere. The authorities won't be able to help us. We'll have to handle this ourselves." Eric's heart raced as he processed the gravity of the situation. "What do you mean, handle this ourselves?" Sinclair's eyes met his. "We need to move quickly. I'm arranging for a safe house. But we can't stay here for long. The people who are after Emma will stop at nothing. I don't know how long we have before they find us." A chill ran down Eric's spine. He had never imagined that his life, or Emma's, would take such a dangerous turn. Everything he thought he knew was being turned upside down. How could they protect Emma when they didn't even know who was after her? "I don't care what it takes," Eric said, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep Emma safe." Sinclair nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. But we'll need to be prepared for anything. The people we're dealing with are ruthless. I've seen their work before. They won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way." As Sinclair spoke, Eric's thoughts drifted to Katie. He couldn't bear the thought of her being pulled into this mess. He needed to keep her in the dark for now, protect her from the fear and uncertainty that was already swallowing them whole. But what if it was too late? The safe house. Later that day, Eric and Emma found themselves at an undisclosed location, far from the city, in a house that could have been hidden in plain sight. It was a modest, inconspicuous place, a far cry from the luxury they had once known. But Eric wasn't concerned with appearances anymore. He was concerned with keeping Emma alive. The house was surrounded by thick trees, isolated from the outside world. It felt like a fortress, but a fortress built on fear. Eric couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a much darker journey. As they settled into the house, Eric's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Sinclair. "They know. They're coming. Be ready." Eric's heart stopped. Who knew? Who was coming? He turned to Emma, who was sitting on the couch, looking lost. He wanted to tell her everything would be okay. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be. "They're coming," Eric whispered, his voice trembling. "We need to move, now." Emma's eyes widened with fear. "Who? Who's coming for us?" "I don't know," Eric said, his heart pounding in his chest. "But we can't wait to find out. We have to get out of here." The sound of a car approaching the driveway echoed in the distance, and Eric's stomach dropped. He quickly grabbed Emma's hand and ushered her toward the back door. As they stepped into the cool night air, Eric's mind raced. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't outrun whatever was coming. But they had to try. For Emma's sake, they had to survive. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the isolated safe house. Eric's mind raced as he led Emma through the darkened woods behind the house, every step echoing in the cold night air. His pulse thudded in his ears, and he could hear his breath quicken with each passing second. They had just a few moments to disappear into the wilderness, to make sure they weren't caught. The people who were after them were closing in. Eric could feel it in his bones. The danger was real, and it was no longer something he could protect Emma from by just hiding behind walls. His grip tightened around Emma's hand, as if that one touch could shield her from the unknown, from the horror that was about to unfold. He glanced over at her, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. Emma's body language screamed of exhaustion and confusion, but there was something else too, determination. He had seen it before, in the way she had faced every challenge head-on after the tragedy. She wasn't a little girl anymore. She had already grown up in ways Eric hadn't been prepared for. But this was different. This wasn't just grief or loss. This was real danger. Eric's mind snapped back to the present. Focus. There would be no turning back now. They reached the edge of the woods, and Eric glanced back at the safe house. He saw a faint glow from the windows, their only warning that someone was on the move. He couldn't wait any longer. Come on, Eric urged, trying to keep his voice steady. We need to move fast. They hurried through the trees, careful not to make any noise. The world around them was silent, as if the night itself held its breath, waiting for something to break it. The only sound was their footsteps, crunching against the leaves and twigs underfoot. As they moved deeper into the woods, Eric felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Why hadn't Sinclair told them more? He had been so vague, so mysterious. There was something he was still hiding. And now, it felt like Eric was walking blindly into a trap. An hour later, they had reached the outskirts of the forest, where a dirt road stretched out into the unknown. It was one of the few roads that could lead them out of this nightmare, if they were lucky enough to get there without being caught. Eric stopped, panting from the exertion. He looked over at Emma, who was still holding his hand, but now her grip was a little weaker. She was tired, but she didn't complain. She never did. Are you okay? He asked, kneeling down beside her. Emma nodded, but the look in her eyes told him she wasn't okay. She was scared. They both were. But there was something deeper inside her now, a resilience, a strength he hadn't seen before. I'm fine, Emma said, her voice shaky but firm. But, what's happening, Uncle Eric? Why are we running? What did we get into? Eric's throat tightened. He didn't have the answers she needed. But the truth was, he didn't understand any of it himself. How had things escalated so quickly? One minute they were living a normal life, the next they were running for their lives, chased by shadows in the dark. I don't know, Emma, he admitted, shaking his head. I don't know what's going on, but I swear to you, I will protect you. We'll get through this together. She met his eyes, searching his face for any sign that he had the answers. But there were none. He wasn't sure how they were going to survive this. He wasn't sure what was coming next. Just then, the sound of an engine broke the stillness, growing louder. Eric's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone anymore. Hide, he hissed urgently, pulling Emma into the dense underbrush. They crouched low, trying to remain as silent as possible. The headlights of a car cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead. Eric held his breath as the car slowed down, coming to a stop just a few feet away. He could hear the muffled voices of men in the car. We need to find them. They can't have gone far, one of them said, his voice cold and menacing. Eric's blood ran cold. They know. They were close. Too close. Emma clutched Eric's arm tightly, her body trembling. She was barely a whisper away from breaking. But Eric couldn't let that happen. Not now. The car sat there for what felt like an eternity. Every second stretched longer than the last. Eric's mind raced, thinking of a way out. If they stayed hidden, they might be safe. But for how long? Finally, the car's engine roared to life again, and it sped off into the distance, leaving nothing but the silence of the forest. Are they gone? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Eric waited for a moment, listening to the sound of the engine fading into the distance. When he was sure they were alone, he slowly exhaled. I think so, he said. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The people after them weren't going to give up. They would come back. And next time, they might not be so easy to avoid. The next day, they spent the night in a small, run-down cabin they found along the road. It wasn't much, just a single room with a fireplace and a couple of dusty chairs. But it was enough for the time being. Eric knew they couldn't stay here for long, but they needed to regroup, figure out their next move. As morning broke, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make sense. Everything about this situation was more complicated than it should have been. He looked over at Emma, who was sitting by the window, staring out at the empty field in front of them. She hadn't said much since their narrow escape. Her silence was more than just a reflection of her fear, it was a wall she had built around herself. She had already experienced so much loss in such a short period, and now, she was being forced into a world of chaos and uncertainty. Eric sat down beside her, his voice soft. "Emma, I need you to listen to me. We're going to get through this. I don't know how, but I'm going to protect you. You're not alone." Emma didn't respond. She just kept staring out the window, her face a mixture of sadness and confusion. "I know you're scared," Eric continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But we have each other. That's all we need. And we'll find a way to stop whatever is coming. I promise." After a long pause, Emma spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if it's too late? What if we can't stop it?" Eric's heart broke at the sound of her voice, so small, so vulnerable. She had every right to feel hopeless. But he couldn't let her give up. He had to be strong for her, even when he felt like the world was collapsing around him. "We will stop it," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not giving up. Not now. Not ever." That afternoon. Later that day, Eric received another text message from Sinclair. His hands shook as he read the message. "Meet me tonight. I have the answers you need. But time is running out." Eric knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to find out what Sinclair knew. He had to get to the bottom of all this. For Emma's sake. The night was heavy with tension as Eric and Emma arrived at the location Sinclair had instructed. The journey had been long, filled with endless twists and turns. Every move they made felt like it was under constant scrutiny, as if someone was always one step behind them. The safe houses, the hidden roads, the constant fear, they had all led them here, to this moment. Eric didn't know what to expect, but he had no choice but to trust Sinclair, the lawyer who had been their only source of guidance throughout this nightmare. And yet, the more Eric thought about it, the more he realized that Sinclair had known far more than he had let on. There had been moments, clues, even the way Sinclair had spoken to him, that suggested he wasn't telling the whole truth. But now, in the final stretch, the truth had to come out. They were running out of time. Emma sat beside him in the car, her face pale, her expression distant. He could see the toll the past few days had taken on her. She had barely said anything since their escape from the cabin. Her eyes, once bright with hope and curiosity, now seemed weighed down by an unimaginable burden. "Are you okay?" Eric asked quietly, glancing at her. Emma nodded but didn't speak. It had become the norm, the silence, the heavy air between them. Eric wished he could take away her fear, her pain, but there was no magic word, no miracle that could fix what they had been through. They pulled up to a secluded building nestled deep in a forest, far away from prying eyes. It looked like an old, abandoned warehouse, dark, industrial, and eerily quiet. Eric's instincts flared. This was not the meeting spot he had envisioned. But there was no turning back now. Eric parked the car, and before he could even open the door, the headlights of another vehicle blinked in the distance, slowly moving toward them. A sleek black SUV pulled to a stop next to their car, and the driver's side window rolled down. It was Sinclair. Eric didn't hesitate. He opened the car door and stepped out, pulling Emma with him. As they approached the SUV, Sinclair's eyes scanned the area nervously. He motioned for them to get in. Hurry, we don't have much time, Sinclair said, his voice low and tense. Eric and Emma climbed into the back seat. As they settled in, the door clicked shut, and the car sped off toward the warehouse. There was an undeniable urgency in the air. Eric felt his heart race again, the familiar feeling of dread creeping back into his chest. Sinclair, Eric said, keeping his voice even, what's going on? Why are we here? What haven't you told me? Sinclair glanced at Eric through the rearview mirror, his face pale. Everything I've told you so far is true. But there's more. Much more. I didn't want to involve you until I knew you had no other choice. But the time has come. Eric's frustration flared. What does that mean? How are we supposed to protect Emma if you keep holding back? I didn't want to drag you into this, Sinclair said, his voice tight. But your niece, she's not just any child. She's the key. The very thing that some people will kill for. Eric's breath caught in his throat. What are you talking about? Your niece's parents weren't just involved in shady dealings. They were part of a much bigger organization, a covert operation that has been manipulating global events for decades. Emma's parents were leading members of this operation. And now, everything they've left behind has fallen into her hands. It's not just an inheritance. It's a power structure that could change everything. Eric stared at him in shock. He couldn't fathom what Sinclair was saying. His mind struggled to make sense of it. But why didn't anyone tell me this? Why wasn't Emma told? Because they wanted to keep her safe. Your sister and her husband knew this day would come, but they couldn't prepare her for what was to follow. The organization didn't want Emma to grow up knowing the truth. It was better to keep her in the dark. But now, Sinclair's voice trailed off as he drove them closer to the building. Now, there's no more time. The warehouse. The black SUV came to a halt in front of the large, steel doors of the warehouse. The building looked abandoned, yet there was a sense of urgency in the air. This was no random location. This was where the answers lay, and perhaps, the resolution of everything that had happened in the last few weeks. Eric opened the door before Sinclair could say anything more. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but he had to protect Emma. He had to understand the truth, even if it meant confronting the danger head-on. Emma, pale and quiet, followed closely behind. Eric could feel her fear without even looking at her. She was still a child, and yet she had already been dragged into a world that no one should ever have to experience. It was unfair, and it made his blood boil. Sinclair led them into the building, the cold concrete floor echoing with their footsteps. The room was dimly lit, its only source of light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. At the far end of the room, a tall figure stood, his back to them. "Welcome, Eric." "Welcome, Emma," the man said, turning around slowly. Eric's eyes narrowed. The man standing before him was older, his face weathered with age and experience. His eyes, however, were sharp and calculating. Eric immediately knew this was no ordinary person. This was someone who had been at the heart of whatever dark web Emma's parents had been involved in. "Who are you?" Eric demanded, stepping forward protectively, positioning himself between Emma and the man. The stranger smiled faintly. "My name is Gabriel. And I've been waiting for you." Eric's blood ran cold. "What do you want with us?" "I don't want anything from you, Eric," Gabriel replied, his voice smooth. "But I do need Emma. She's the key to everything. She always has been." Emma looked up at Gabriel with wide, confused eyes. "What does that mean? I don't understand." Gabriel turned his gaze to her, his expression softening, though the menace still lingered beneath the surface. "Your parents were part of an operation designed to manipulate global power. Their role in this organization was pivotal. And now, you've inherited that power, Emma. Everything they built is now yours. All the information, all the resources. You are the heir. Eric's heart stopped. No. This can't be true. You're saying she's some kind of a pawn? Gabriel chuckled, the sound dry and detached. No, Eric. She's not a pawn. She's a queen. And just like any queen, she has the power to change everything. The truth revealed. Eric's mind was reeling. The idea of Emma, his niece, being involved in some vast and dangerous operation, was too much to comprehend. He had always seen her as a normal child, someone who had lost everything and now just needed protection. But now, everything had changed. She wasn't just an orphaned girl who needed a home. She was the heir to something far bigger, and much darker, than anyone could have imagined. Gabriel continued, his voice low and hypnotic. Your niece's parents were key figures in an underground network that shaped the fate of many. They weren't just investors, Eric. They controlled the flow of information, the movements of money, and the rise and fall of leaders. And Emma, by virtue of her birthright, controls the future of that empire. Eric took a step back, shaking his head. No. This is madness. I understand your disbelief, Gabriel said. But it's the truth. And now, Emma has a choice. She can take control of what's hers, or she can let the power slip away into the hands of those who will use it for far worse purposes. Emma's voice trembled as she spoke. But I don't want this. I don't want any of it. I just want to be safe. Gabriel looked at her with a mix of pity and something else, something colder. You don't have a choice, Emma. The world won't let you be safe. Not unless you take control. Not unless you decide how this story ends. Eric felt the weight of his niece's fear press down on him. This wasn't her fault. She had never asked for this. But now, it was up to him to help her navigate this darkness. Whatever this is, we'll face it together, Eric said firmly, looking directly at Gabriel. You're not getting Emma. Not today. Not ever. Gabriel's smile faded, replaced with something far more dangerous. We'll see about that. A final decision. The room fell into silence as both sides stood, waiting for the next move. Eric didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear, he would protect Emma with everything he had. Whatever this organization was, whatever power they sought, it didn't matter. All that mattered now was his.